The sun hung low over the riverside ranch, painting the sky in shades of burnt orange and crimson. Jack Morrison stood at the fence line, his weathered hands gripping the wooden rail, watching the herd settle in for the evening. At 52, with creases etched into his face like a map of 3 decades of ranching, he moved with the ease of a man who knew exactly where he belonged. The land around him, all 847 acres of it, had been in his family for 4 generations. It wasn't just property, it was his blood. His divorce had finalized 6 months ago. Sarah had wanted out of ranch life, wanted the city, wanted something different. Jack understood. He'd offered to buy out her half of the property, but the negotiations had turned ugly. Her lawyer had been relentless. In the end, Jack had lost a significant chunk of his savings and kept the land, barely. It had been worth it. The sound of tires on gravel pulled him from his thoughts. A black Range Rover with custom chrome trim pulled through the eastern gate, the one Jack had left unlocked for the feed delivery. The vehicle wasn't farm equipment. It screamed money, the kind of money that didn't belong out here. Jack squinted as the SUV approached, kicking up a cloud of dust that caught the golden hour light. He didn't recognize the vehicle or the platinum blonde woman behind the wheel, though he recognized the type immediately. Designer sunglasses, a silk scarf wrapped around her neck despite the warmth, the kind of polish that existed solely to be photographed. She rolled down the window as she approached, her face breaking into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi there," she called out, her voice carrying the musical lilt of someone used to charming people. "This is such a gorgeous place. I'm looking for the owner, Jack Morrison. Is that you?" Jack walked toward the vehicle, his jaw tightening slightly. "Depends who's asking." "I'm Victoria Hastings." She removed her sunglasses, revealing sharp blue eyes that assessed him with the precision of a jeweler appraising a diamond. "I bought the western parcel, the 30 acres adjacent to your property line." Jack's stomach dropped. He didn't know about that sale. His neighbor, old Tom Patterson, had sold off a portion of his land 6 months ago. Jack had been too preoccupied with the divorce to pay much attention to who'd bought it. "Right," Jack said slowly, "and you're here because—" "Because," Victoria said, her smile widening, "I'm having a little gathering this Saturday. Nothing too crazy, just a pool party with some friends, a housewarming of sorts. And I realized I might need to use some of your eastern field for parking, just for one afternoon. I'd be happy to compensate you, of course." Jack looked at her steadily. "No." Victoria blinked, as if she hadn't encountered that word in some time. "I'm sorry." "I said no. Your guests can park on your property, not mine." Victoria's smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered across her features, quick as a snake's tongue. "Mr. Morrison, I'm trying to be neighborly here. I'm trying to establish a good relationship with you. Surely we can work something out." "We can work something out," Jack said, his tone even. "You respect my property line and I respect yours. That's the arrangement." Victoria was quiet for a moment, her fingers drumming against the steering wheel. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its warmth. "You know, I did my research on this land. It's lovely, but it's not doing much, is it? Just cows. A ranch is so limiting, so 1970s. I'm planning to develop the area, bring it into the modern era. But don't worry, that's not your concern right now. Saturday, we'll make it work." She rolled up the window before Jack could respond and pulled away, her tires crunching loudly on the gravel path. Jack watched her go, his jaw clenched so hard he could taste metal. He didn't like her. More than that, he didn't trust her. The next morning, Jack rode out to check the eastern fence line, the boundary between his property and Victoria's. His horse, a 16-year-old bay named Dallas, moved beneath him with the steady confidence of an animal that had walked this land its entire life. What he found made him stop cold. The fence had been marked. Fresh pink surveyor's tape hung from the posts at regular intervals, and beyond it, on Victoria's land, there was activity. Heavy equipment was being unloaded from trucks. Men in hard hats moved with purpose. Jack didn't need anyone to tell him what he was looking at: construction. He rode closer to the property line, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scope of what was happening. A foundation was being laid out. Not a small cottage. This was substantial. A sprawling footprint that would dwarf the existing structures on her land. "Hell," Jack muttered, turning Dallas back toward home. By Thursday evening, the house was nearly up. A modern monstrosity of glass and steel and pale limestone, all harsh angles and environmental pretension. Through the construction fence, Jack could see a massive rectangular pool being finished. the concrete still wet and gleaming. Lounge chairs were being arranged around it, dozens of them. String lights were being strung between tall wooden posts. Jack was in the barn mending tack when his phone buzzed. The call was from Marcus, his ranch hand of 15 years. "Boss, you're gonna want to come see this," Marcus said, and Jack could hear the tension in his voice. Jack found Marcus standing at the eastern property line. Marcus was pointing at the ground. Someone had opened the gate. It wasn't just unlocked, it was propped wide open with a rock. And beyond it, on Jack's land, tire tracks crisscrossed through the grass in deep, ugly ruts. Multiple vehicles had been driving back and forth. "When did this happen?" Jack demanded. "Sometime this morning. I was out checking the north pasture. When I came back around 2, the gate was like this. Looks like they've been using your land as a shortcut. She's got construction crews coming and going, and they're just driving through your property instead of going all the way around her own." Marcus shook his head in disgust. She didn't even ask. Jack's hands clenched into fists. He took a breath, then walked toward the gate. He'd close it. He'd lock it. And tomorrow he'd contact a lawyer if he had to. But as he reached the gate, he heard a voice behind him. "Mr. Morrison, hi." Jack turned to find Victoria standing 20 feet away, a bottle of wine in her hands. She was wearing a white linen outfit that probably cost more than Jack's monthly operating budget. Her hair was perfectly styled despite the heat. She looked like she was about to step into a magazine shoot, not stand in a dusty field. "Victoria," he said, not bothering to keep the coldness from his voice. "I came to apologize about the gate," she said, her voice dripping with false contrition. "My construction crew used your land as a shortcut. I gave them explicit instructions not to, but apparently there was some miscommunication. I brought you this as a peace offering." She held out the wine bottle. It was a 1995 Shadow Margox. The bottle alone cost more than a decent used truck. Jack didn't take it. "You'll tell your crew to use your property only. From now on, I'm locking this gate." Victoria's smile faltered for just a second. Then it returned, sharper this time. "You know, you seem like a man who doesn't understand the bigger picture, Mr. Morrison. You have this beautiful land and you're using it for, what? Beef. Do you know how many environmental studies show that cattle ranching is one of the worst uses of land in terms of climate impact? Methane emissions, water usage, ground degradation. Meanwhile, I'm creating something that will actually contribute to the local economy. Bring in revenue, attract business." "Is that right?" Jack said quietly. "Yes, and you're sitting here with your cows, acting like you're some kind of guardian of nature, when really you're just hoarding land that could be put to better use." Her eyes had gone cold now, the facade of friendliness completely dissolved. "This is my property, Mr. Morrison. Everything on it is mine. And on Saturday I'm throwing a party, a very exclusive party for very important people. If your animals make any kind of disturbance, that's your problem, not mine." "My animals stay on my land," Jack said. "Good, see that they do." Victoria turned on her heel and walked away, not bothering to take the wine with her. It sat in the dust between them, a bottle worth more than some people's rent, now just an insult. Jack picked up the bottle and held it loosely in his hand. He watched Victoria disappear over the rise, heading back to her construction site, and then he looked at the open gate. He closed it, and then he pulled out his phone and called Tom Patterson, the man who'd sold her the land. "Tom, it's Jack Morrison. I need to ask you something about Victoria Hastings and that land deal." There was a pause on the other end, then a heavy sigh. "Jack, I was gonna call you. I wanted to give you first refusal on that parcel, but you were in the thick of your divorce, and she had cash. Presented me with an offer I couldn't refuse, closed in 2 weeks. But Jack, I saw the construction plans she submitted to the county. She's building more than that one house. She's got development permits for 15 units. Probably going to turn the whole area into some kind of resort or exclusive community." Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. "Did you tell her about the water rights, the spring on that land?" "She didn't ask," Tom said quietly. "And I didn't volunteer the information. Jack, I'm sorry. I should have given you first shot." After Jack hung up, he stood in the gathering darkness, holding that expensive bottle of wine, and made a decision. He wasn't going to let some city woman waltz in and take what she wanted from his land. Not his property, not his peace, not his home. The morning of the party, Jack woke before dawn and moved methodically through his routine. He fed the animals, checked on the herd, and then spent an hour reinforcing the eastern gate, making sure it was locked tight and wouldn't open accidentally or otherwise. He'd spent most of Thursday night researching Victoria Hastings. What he found was interesting. She was 46 years old, divorced twice, and the founder of a luxury lifestyle brand called Hastings & Co. The company sold high-end home goods and wellness products with eye-popping markups. Her social media presence was carefully curated. Thousands of photos of her at exclusive events with famous people, always perfectly lit and filtered. She had 2.3 million followers, but when he dug deeper into business reports and legal filings, a different picture emerged. The company was hemorrhaging money. She was being investigated by the FTC for misleading advertising claims. 3 different lawsuits were pending against her for deceptive marketing practices. Victoria Hastings was drowning. The ranch property was an escape plan, a reinvention. She was building an exclusive resort community where she could position herself as some kind of wellness guru, far enough away from the urban centers where people knew her reputation. By noon on Saturday, the transformation was complete. The parking area on Victoria's land was packed. At least 100 cars lined the property, luxury vehicles worth more than Jack's entire operation. Valets in polo shirts directed traffic with the efficiency of airport personnel. The pool area was an extravaganza of excess. A DJ booth with a sound system that probably cost more than a house, a catering tent with an open bar, waiters in white uniforms circulating with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. String lights crisscrossed overhead, creating a canopy of illumination. The pool itself glowed an ethereal blue, the water mirror-smooth and inviting. But it was the music and the noise that carried across the property line. The bass was so loud Jack could feel it vibrating through the walls of his barn. Electronic dance music blared at levels that seemed designed to be heard from space. Shouting, laughter, the sound of a boombox playing thumping pop music as drunk guests lounged by the pool. Jack stood at the fence line, watching through binoculars. He counted at least 15 security guards scattered around the property, most of them positioned at the boundaries, not the entrances. They were there to keep people from leaving, not from crashing. At 2 p.m., one of the security guards approached the gate on Jack's side. The guard was a thick-necked man in a black polo shirt with a radio clipped to his belt. He tried the gate, found it locked, and then knocked on the fence loudly. Jack walked out to meet him. "Your boss asked us to patrol the perimeter," the guard said, his tone official. "I need to be able to access this gate in case of emergency." "That's my property," Jack said. "No access." "Look, man, I'm just doing my job." "Then do your job on your employer's property. This is mine." The guard didn't argue further. He radios something into his unit and walked back toward the party. At 4 p.m., the noise had only increased. Jack was in the barn when Marcus appeared, looking stressed. "Boss, the herd's getting antsy. All that noise and the smell from the catering, it's agitating them. They keep trying to move toward the fence line." Jack nodded. Cows had strong olfactory senses. The smell of roasting meat, of alcohol, of unfamiliar humans and chemicals, it would trigger their instinct to investigate or flee, depending on their temperament. "Keep them in the north pasture," Jack said, "closer to the house, away from the fence line." But even as he said it, he wondered if that was really what he wanted. By 6 p.m., the party had reached a crescendo. The DJ was playing increasingly aggressive electronic music. Guests were drunk, swimming naked in the pool, dancing on lounges. Jack could see Victoria moving through the crowd, a glass of champagne in hand, photographing everything. She was going to use this for her Instagram. This was content. This was her reinvention. Jack made a decision. He walked to the north pasture where the herd was gathered. The animals stirred as he approached. His presence usually meant something was about to happen. Feed, movement, veterinary care. "Sorry, ladies," he said softly, running his hand along the nearest cow's neck. "Today's going to be different." He made a radio call to Marcus. "Open the north pasture gate, the one that connects to the eastern field." "You sure, boss?" Marcus asked. "Do it." There was a pause, then, "Okay, gates open." Jack pulled out his phone and called Victoria's number. She answered on the third ring, already slightly slurred. "Jack, hi, are you calling about something?" "Victoria, I'm calling to tell you that I've just opened a gate on my property that connects to your fence line. My herd is going to wander over. I wouldn't want you to be surprised." Victoria's voice sharpened with sudden sobriety. "What? No, absolutely not. You keep those animals on your property, that's..." Trespassing, Jack said quietly. Yeah, I know all about that. He hung up before she could respond. For the first 15 minutes, nothing happened. Jack stood at the fence line, watching. The herd didn't immediately move. They were creatures of habit, comfortable with routine. The sudden opening of a gate didn't automatically mean they'd walk through it. But then one of the younger heifers, a restless 3-year-old named Duchess, approached the open gate. She stuck her head through, nostrils flaring, taking in the smells on the other side. The sound of music, the smell of food and human chaos. Duchess walked through. The rest of the herd followed with the slow, inevitable momentum of water finding its level. Within minutes, Jack's 83 head of Angus cattle were beginning to wander across the boundary into Victoria's property. They moved at their own pace, curious, drawn by the chaos and the smells. Most were peaceful, docile creatures. They weren't violent. They weren't angry. They were just cows, confused by the sudden change in their environment, investigating. But on a ranch, 83 cows represented nearly $500,000 in value. They represented weight and muscle and raw presence. They represented a problem for anyone not expecting them. The screaming started approximately 4 minutes after the first cow set hoof on Victoria's property. It began with one of the guests spotting the animals, a drunk woman in a bikini pointing at a massive 1,800-pound Angus steer and shrieking as if she'd encountered a grizzly bear. Then panic rippled through the crowd like a shock wave. Jack watched from the fence line, feeling the weight of what he'd done settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. The herd had moved directly toward the pool area, drawn by the lights and the smells and the general chaos. They weren't aggressive, they were confused. But to people who'd never been around large livestock, the sheer size and presence of 83 cows was terrifying. A steer named Thunderbolt, 800 pounds of solid muscle and horn, wandered directly into the catering tent, his horns catching on the fabric and bringing down an entire section of the structure. Trays of food went flying. An ice sculpture of a swan collapsed. The tent collapsed like a sandcastle. Another group of cows had discovered the open bar area. They weren't drinking, but they were investigating with bovine curiosity, knocking over bottles and glassware. Security guards were running everywhere, shouting into radios, trying to figure out how to handle an animal control situation they'd never imagined. Some guests were laughing nervously. Some were still trying to take photos and videos. Most were running, scrambling away from the animals as if the cows were charging them. Jack saw Victoria emerge from the crowd, her perfect white outfit now streaked with mud and champagne. Her face had gone from glamorous to wild, her hair undone, her carefully constructed facade completely shattered. She spotted him at the fence line. "Get them off MY property," she screamed, her voice cracking with rage and panic. "Get them off now." Jack looked at his herd, at the animals he'd raised and cared for, and he felt the first real twinge of regret. "Marcus," he said quietly into his radio, "bring the horses, bring food, let's bring them home." "Yes, sir," Marcus replied, understanding immediately. Bringing the herd back took 90 minutes of careful work. Jack and Marcus rode through the chaos on horseback, using the animals to gently herd the cows back toward the open gate. The cattle didn't resist. They were happy to return to familiar territory, away from the confusing noise and lights. By the time the last cow had passed through the gate, Victoria's party was in complete disarray. The DJ had stopped playing. Most of the guests were demanding refunds or threatening to leave one-star reviews. The structural damage to the tent would require thousands to repair. The champagne and food situation was a complete loss. And Victoria stood in the wreckage of her perfect party, her phone to her ear, calling someone, probably a lawyer. Jack closed and locked the gate, securing the chain. He'd won the battle, but as he rode back toward the barn in the gathering darkness, he had the sinking feeling that he'd just lost something far more important. "Jack, we have a problem," she said, her tone serious. "Victoria Hastings has filed a lawsuit against you, trespassing, property damage, and reckless endangerment." Jack's stomach dropped. "I did not trespass, my animals are on your property, yes. But she's claiming that you deliberately released them onto her property with the intention of causing chaos and property damage. The security footage from her party shows your herd destroying the catering area, and there's videographic evidence of the damage. She's quantifying it at around $847,000. For what? Some spilled champagne in a tent. For the tent, the catering, the damaged landscaping, the water system damage. Apparently one of the steers went through a concrete feature in her garden. Plus, she's claiming emotional distress and defamation of her business. Jack closed his eyes. What do I do? We fight it, but Jack, this is going to be expensive, and she has deep pockets. Her team is going to come at you hard. 2 days later, the story broke in the local news. Not the local news, the regional news. The story went semi-viral because of its absurdity. Cattle crash luxury pool party was the headline. News stations sent cameras to both properties. Victoria gave interviews where she played the victim, a successful businesswoman terrorized by an angry, jealous neighbor who'd intentionally weaponized his animals against her. He was intimidated by my success, she said in one interview, her eyes perfectly tear-lined but not actually wet. She'd learned how to cry on cue. He wanted to tear down what I'm building because he's scared that the world is changing and leaving him behind. Social media erupted. Victoria's followers rallied to her side. They saw her as a victim of rural aggression. Jack became the villain, angry rancher, probably racist, definitely misogynistic, a man so desperate to hold onto power that he'd destroy a woman's dreams. The comments on Jack's Facebook page were brutal. This is toxic masculinity in its purest form. Protecting his precious land while the planet burns. She's right about cattle ranching being terrible for the environment. Jack wasn't active on social media, didn't have the skills to fight back in that arena. He just endured it. But the real damage was local. Banks called in loans. Insurance companies dropped him. The feed supplier he'd worked with for 15 years politely explained that they could no longer service his account, citing business restructuring. A contract to sell cattle to a major processor was suddenly canceled. No explanation given. And then the really bad news arrived. Jack, Patricia said over the phone, we got discovery from Victoria's legal team. She's obtained documents from the county assessor's office regarding your water rights situation. Jack's blood ran cold. What situation? The spring on her property, the one Tom Patterson never mentioned to her, feeds into an aquifer that's connected to your well system. She's claiming that you've been benefiting from groundwater that technically originates on her property, and she's filing an injunction to stop you from using it. That land was Tom's for 50 years. Those water rights were never formalized, Jack, never officially documented in a way that would stand up in court. And now she owns the land where the water originates. She's got a point, legally speaking. Jack sat down heavily. The ranch's well-supplied water to the barn, to the house, to the animals themselves. Without it, the operation would collapse. How long do I have? He asked quietly. The injunction hearing is in 3 weeks, but Jack, if she wins. I know. The next call came from the county. The building permits Victoria had filed for her development project had been fast-tracked and approved. She was going to be able to develop those 15 residential units, build out a resort facility, and completely transform the landscape around Jack's property. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. Marcus found him that night in the barn, sitting in the dark. Boss, Marcus said quietly, a lot of the local ranch hands are talking. They want to know what's happening. Some of them are saying they'll stand with you whatever you need. Jack appreciated it, but he shook his head. This isn't their fight, Marcus. This is between me and her, and I think, he paused, I think I made a mistake. With the party, with everything, with how I handled this from the start, I let emotion rule me instead of being smart about it. Over the next week, Jack did something he didn't want to do. He called a meeting with his accountant and Patricia. Here's where we are, his accountant said, laying out the numbers. The lawsuit, even if we win, is going to cost you about $250,000 in legal fees. The water rights issue could cost you even more, and if you lose, you might not have a functional ranch. You've got equity in the land, but the market in this area is about to be flooded with development properties. Your value is dropping. So what are you saying? Jack asked. I'm saying, his accountant said carefully, that we need to consider selling. The words hung in the air like something toxic. Jack stood and walked out of the meeting. He went back to the ranch, to his herd, and he sat with them in the pasture as the sun set. These animals had been his life. They were his purpose. But he couldn't give them a life on a ranch without water, without a functioning operation, without his savings. By the end of the third week, Jack had made a decision. He would contact a real estate broker. He would sell the Riverside Ranch. Jack's lawyer Patricia forwarded it to him electronically, a settlement offer from Victoria's team. But as Jack read the terms, his confusion grew. The offer was generous, too generous. Victoria was offering to drop the lawsuit entirely, to stop the injunction on the water rights, to pay Jack $150,000 as a good-faith gesture for the inconvenience caused to both parties. In exchange, all she asked was that Jack sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, and never speak publicly about her business, or this situation. He had 48 hours to respond. Patricia called immediately after she knew he'd read it. "This is good news, Jack. This is a way out." "Why is she doing this?" Jack asked. Maybe her lawyer convinced her that the lawsuit wasn't as strong as she thought. Maybe she wants to focus on her development project without litigation hanging over her. Does the reason matter? You could settle this, avoid 6 months of court proceedings, and walk away with actual money. Jack read the terms again, his mind working through the implications. "Patricia, if I sign this, I can never tell anyone what she did, never explain my side of the story, never defend myself publicly. That's the nature of an NDA. So she gets to control the narrative, her version of events, that I'm an angry, jealous neighbor who tried to terrorize her. That's the only story that gets told." Jack. No, he hung up the phone. He sat with that settlement offer for hours, reading it over and over, searching for the trap he knew must be there. Because Victoria Hastings didn't offer settlement because she was feeling generous. She offered settlement because she was vulnerable. He pulled up his research on her again. The FTC investigation, the lawsuits, the faltering company. And then he found something he'd missed before, a piece from a business newsletter from just 6 months ago. Hastings & Co. bankruptcy. Rumors mount as founder faces multiple investigations. Victoria was already bankrupt. The ranch property was part of a restructuring plan, and the lawsuits and investigations meant she couldn't access the normal channels for funding. The settlement offer wasn't a sign of strength, it was a sign of desperation. If Jack signed that NDA, Victoria could continue to operate, to build her resort, to rehabilitate her public image as the victim of an unstable neighbor. But if he refused, the story would eventually come out. The truth about her business practices, the truth about how she tried to bully a neighbor, the truth about her desperate attempt to silence him. Jack sat at his kitchen table and made a phone call. "Hi, this is Jack Morrison. I'd like to speak with a journalist about a story." The article came out on a Thursday in a regional business publication that had a decent online reach. The journalist, a woman named Sarah Mendez, had done thorough work. She'd interviewed Jack, Marcus, and Tom Patterson. She'd obtained the court filings from the current lawsuit. She dug into Victoria's business history and found the FTC investigation, the bankruptcies, the lawsuits from previous clients claiming fraud. The article was titled, "From Luxury Lifestyle Brand to Rural Bully, Inside Victoria Hastings' Expansion into Montana." It told the whole story, her arrival at the property, her aggressive behavior, the trespassing by her construction crews, the dismissal of Jack's concerns, the false claims about environmental responsibility, and then the orchestrated silence, the settlement offer designed to keep Jack quiet while she rehabilitated her image in the rural communities where she was trying to build her resort. The article quoted the FTC report directly. Hastings & Co. engaged in a pattern of unfair and deceptive practices, making false claims about product benefits while targeting vulnerable consumers seeking wellness solutions. It included statements from previous customers she'd defrauded, people who'd spent thousands on her products only to discover they were buying overpriced, rebranded items from bulk suppliers. And it ended with a simple quote from Jack. "She came onto my land, tried to take what wasn't hers, and when I pushed back, she tried to buy my silence. I decided the truth was worth more than her money." The article didn't go mega viral, but it went far enough. Within 48 hours, 5 of the 15 permits Victoria had obtained for her development project were being reviewed for fraud. The county commissioners requested a meeting about the claims in the article. Victoria's social media team was in full damage control mode, but her followers were turning on her fast. People who'd bought her products and felt scammed were sharing their stories. And then the phone rang. It was Victoria herself. Jack recognized her voice immediately, though it was completely different from before. No polish, no manipulation, just raw. "You destroyed me," she said quietly. "I told the truth," Jack replied. "You signed an NDA. You agreed to settle." "I never signed anything, Victoria. I refused your settlement. You're the one who did this." There was a long silence. Then, "My company is going under. The banks are pulling funding. The development project is on indefinite hold. My investors are suing me. Do you understand what you've done?" Jack felt the weight of it, the real weight of what he'd set in motion. "I understand that you came to my land, treated me with disrespect, tried to push me around, and then tried to silence me. That's on you." "I'm going to lose everything," Victoria said, and her voice cracked. "Everything, my company, the property, all of it. I was trying to start over, and you." "You should have thought of that before you tried to take my water rights," Jack said. "Before you decided my land was worthless and my life was outdated. You got what you earned, Victoria." But even as he said it, Jack felt a strange hollowness inside himself. Yes, he'd fought back. Yes, he'd defended his land and his life. But in doing so, he'd destroyed a person. He'd put a woman's life through a media blender and broadcast it to thousands of people. 6 weeks after the article published, the Riverside Ranch officially went on the market. Not because Jack had lost his legal battles. Actually, he'd won them. The water rights injunction had been dismissed. The lawsuit had been dropped once Victoria's financial situation became public knowledge and her legal team abandoned her. The county had begun reviewing her development permits, and half of them had been suspended pending investigation. But winning wasn't the same as surviving. Jack stood at the gate of his family's property on a cold morning in November, watching as a real estate team set up the "For Sale" sign. The marker was glossy and professional, featuring aerial photos of the ranch at its best. He'd won the battle with Victoria Hastings, but the cost had been too high. The media attention from the article had attracted investors and buyers to the area, people who wanted property near the Montana Ranch war story. Jack had received offers for the land, some of them quite good. But the offers came with visions of development, of subdivisions, of change. The only way Jack could afford to keep the ranch at all was to subdivide it and sell portions of it. And that would destroy the ecosystem he'd spent 30 years building. It would break up the watershed. It would fragment the land into smaller, less functional pieces. And so, Jack had made the decision to sell the entire operation as a single unit. Maybe a new owner would keep it as a working ranch. Maybe they wouldn't. Either way, the Riverside Ranch, his family's legacy, his life's work, was going to change forever. Marcus had already found another job at a larger operation 2 hours north. The man had tears in his eyes when he hugged Jack goodbye, but he understood. There was no other choice. Jack had spent the previous day walking the property one final time. Every acre, every fence line, every pasture where he'd worked cattle, mended equipment, built something that mattered. It was selling because of decisions he'd made in anger. On his last morning as the owner of Riverside Ranch, Jack was up before dawn, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise from the porch. The herd was still there, grazing peacefully. In another month, they'd belong to someone else. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Victoria Hastings files for bankruptcy. Luxury lifestyle company dissolves. The article detailed the complete collapse of Hastings, and dozens of investors had pulled their funding once the FTC investigation became public. Multiple retail partners had dropped her products. She'd lost the ranch property, which had been seized by creditors. She was facing personal bankruptcy as well. In terms of the ranch war, Jack had won decisively. Victoria Hastings was finished. But as Jack read about her financial ruin, about the foreclosure on her property, about the investigation into her personal assets, he didn't feel victorious. He felt tired. His phone rang, Patricia Chen. "Jack, you've got an offer. A good one. A corporation from back east. They specialize in luxury ranch experiences. They want to buy the entire operation and convert it into a high-end, exclusive destination for wealthy clients who want to experience authentic ranch life. They're offering $4.2 million. "What happens to the land?" Jack asked quietly. According to the proposal, they'd keep the ranching operation intact as a tourist experience. They'd build some luxury guest houses, install a spa, Add hiking trails and horseback riding packages, it would become a resort. Jack closed his eyes. He'd spent 3 decades keeping the land wild and functional. And now it was going to become what Victoria had always wanted it to be, a playground for wealthy urbanites seeking authenticity. The corporation would buy it and transform it. Different owner, same result. Accept the offer, Jack said. Over the next 3 weeks, Jack prepared for the transition. He taught the new management team about the herd, about the water systems, about the rhythms of the ranch. They listened politely, but without real interest. To them, it was just property, an asset to be managed for profit. On the day of closing, Jack signed papers in Patricia's office. The signatures transferred 847 acres, 83 head of cattle, farm equipment, and 30 years of his life to a corporation based in New Jersey that had never set foot on the land. When it was done, Patricia slid a check across the desk. $4.2 million, minus fees and taxes and lawyer costs. Jack's share was approximately $2.8 million. He was financially secure for the rest of his life. He was also homeless. The ranch house came with the sale. "What will you do?" Patricia asked gently. Jack looked at the check for a moment, then back at her. "I have no idea." The last thing Jack did before leaving the Riverside Ranch forever was walk out to the eastern pasture, to the fence line that separated his property from what had been Victoria's land. Her house had been repossessed. The pool had been drained and was cracking in the Montana winter cold. The development project had been completely abandoned. The empty foundation was all that remained, exposed to the elements like a skeleton. Jack stood there for a long time, watching the wind blow across the abandoned construction site. He'd come out here with the intention of proving something, proving that his way of life mattered, proving that he couldn't be pushed around, proving that the land was sacred. Instead, he'd proven that he could destroy a person with the same violence she'd threatened to use against him, just in a different form. He'd won, and in winning, he'd lost everything that made the fighting worthwhile. Jack turned away from the fence and walked back toward his truck. Marcus had already left. The herd had already been transported to their new owner's property. The house behind him was empty of anything that was his. He got in the truck and started the engine. And he drove away from the Riverside Ranch, not knowing where he was going, understanding for the first time that winning and losing aren't opposites. Jack Morrison was in the mountains of western North Carolina, in a small town called Asheville, working as a sustainable agriculture consultant for the Blue Ridge Land Trust. He helped small farmers improve their practices, taught workshops on water management, and dedicated his days to learning from the land rather than fighting for it. He'd rented a small cottage on 10 acres, enough to keep his hands on soil without being responsible for a legacy that had broken him. One morning, while he was reading the news with his coffee, a headline caught his attention. Montana Ranch resort closes amid financial crisis and environmental violations. He read with a strange mixture of emotions. The corporation that had bought his land had overspent on renovations and underestimated operating costs. The luxury ranch experience hadn't attracted the high-end clientele they'd projected. The environmental impact reports had revealed significant damage to the aquifer from the construction work. The resort had lasted barely 2 years before closing. The land was being seized again, this time by the state for environmental remediation. The article included an aerial photo of the property. The guest houses were in various states of disrepair. The expensive furnishings had been removed and sold off. The pastures were overgrown. The ranch house, Jack's family home, had boarded up windows. It took Jack an hour to cry, sitting alone in his cottage with his coffee getting cold. The land had broken everyone it touched. Him, Victoria, the corporation, the land itself was suffering. But he also received a letter that week, forwarded to him through Patricia Chen's office. The return address was a medical clinic in Missoula, Montana. Inside, handwritten on simple paper, was a message. "Jack, I'm not sure if you'll read this. Patricia said you'd left the state, and I don't know if she'll even forward it to you, but I wanted to try. I wanted to apologize. I don't expect forgiveness. I deserve every bit of what happened to me and more. When I came to your land, I was running. I was terrified of being nobody, of my failures catching up with me. I thought if I could reinvent myself in a place where nobody knew my history, I could just become someone new. someone successful and important. But you were already there. You already had something real. Land, community, work that mattered. And instead of respecting that, I tried to take it or destroy it or rebuild it in my image. I was so angry that you wouldn't let me. After everything fell apart, I spent 6 months in my car, then in shelters, then eventually I worked my way into this position at a clinic. It's not glamorous. I make minimum wage. Nobody knows my name or my brand, and it's the first time in my life I've felt okay. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand that what you did wasn't just justice. It was necessary. I was a predator and you stopped me. But I also want you to know that stopping me didn't make you better than me. It just made you someone who'd learned a hard lesson. I hope you're okay. I hope you found what you were looking for. Victoria. Jack read the letter 3 times. He didn't reply, but he also didn't throw it away. That evening he sat on his porch in North Carolina and watched the sun set over the Blue Ridge Mountains. The view was completely different from Montana, greener, more forested, less vast, but it was beautiful in its own way. His phone buzzed. It was a message from the Blue Ridge Land Trust. The Harrison family wants to talk to you about converting their 400-acre property to sustainable cattle ranching. Interested? Jack smiled. He was very interested. He'd learned something from everything that had happened. You could lose your land and still keep your purpose. You could win a war and discover you'd been fighting for the wrong things all along. You could destroy someone and learn that destruction isn't the same as salvation. And you could start over. That night, Jack sat down and started writing, not to defend himself or explain his actions, but to process what he'd learned. To understand the trajectory from a man protecting his family legacy to a man discovering that legacy is only valuable if it's shared and respected rather than fiercely guarded. By the time he finished, he had the outline of a book. A memoir, maybe, or a warning. A story about what happens when 2 people collide over land and pride and both lose more than they ever could have gained by fighting. The title came to him immediately. The Cost of Winning. As Jack closed his laptop and finished his whiskey, he looked out at the dark mountains and thought about the Riverside Ranch. It was being reclaimed by the state. In 20 years, maybe it would be a national forest or a protected watershed. The land would heal. The water would clear. The damage would be undone. And maybe that was the real justice, not that Victoria Hastings had been destroyed, but that the land itself would outlast them all. Would remember neither the man who'd fought for it nor the woman who'd tried to exploit it. Would simply continue being what it always was, earth and water and sky, indifferent to human ambition. Jack picked up his coffee, now cold, and drank it anyway. He had a ranch to visit tomorrow, a family who needed help, a future that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone.